And now it's time to know your heads of state. What? You really gotta learn the names and faces of presidents and prime minister peeps all over the planet? I thought this was a geography class. Well, it is, and you are, because there are some really important individual peoples to know so you understand what's happening on the planet in terms of current events and history and even geography. There are those policymakers, decision makers, war starters, keepers of the peace that affect the lives not only of their own citizens, but in a globalized world, their decisions increasingly affect the whole planet and almost everybody on it. One need look no further than U.S. President Barack Obama or Donald Trump to see how the decisions of a single leader can affect millions, if not billions of people the world over. What do I mean by that? Well, Barack Obama is sitting in the White House. Now, Donald Trump, he is in the position of heading the United States, the most powerful country on planet Earth in many respects. So this one person can start a war, can end a war, could decide to give $1 billion in aid to Kenya, could decide to retract $1 billion of aid to Brazil, could even formulate and pass a corporate tax policy. Now, you'd say, wait, that's a corporate tax policy. That would only affect the businesses in the United States. I just did. The ripple effect of all of these things goes well beyond the borders of the country and will affect business and or peoples and or everything all over the planet. And he's not alone anymore. I'm not trying to suggest that the U.S. president is the most powerful position and they stand alone. No. I mean, just look at Russia or China or even India or Brazil. These are important peoples whose policies within their own countries affect millions, if not billions, out in the rest of planet Earth. So you should probably know who they are. You should probably know their political positions, who they're friends with, who they're allies with, who they're enemies with, who they like, who they hate, who they work with, who they trade with, to better understand their motivations and be able to predict their future moves. Here's the thing. A lot of people think, oh, well, boy, you're like super smart. Or you watch TV and you see political analysts on there and you're like, wow, they're super smart. How do they know so much? They can predict the future. They can see what's going on. It's really not that hard. Once you know these characters, they're like characters in a play. The whole world is a stage and most of these leaders are characters. And once you know the characters and you know their motivations and you know their history and kind of how they think and what they like and who they work well with, you can very easily start to predict what's going to happen next. You'll know that, hey, there's this conflict going on here. I know which way Russia's going. Hey, there's this big economic policy over here. I know which way China's going because I know the leaders. And you definitely want to be able to recognize them by their face. Why? Well, because we're humans. We're kind of visual learners. So you know this person, you imprint this information that I'm going to give you about this person, and then when you see their face, you're like, I kind of know that person. I've never met him, but I kind of know him. And you do want to be able to recognize them, actually, in case you're just walking down the street in Italy and you bump into the prime minister. You want to party with that guy. So let's do this. As I suggested, this list is not all-inclusive. I don't really care to know the president of Albania or Mongolia or Madagascar. No offense to my Albanian, Mongolian, and Madagascarian friends, but those are not particularly powerful countries, either regionally or globally, so the policies that they make don't affect much outside of their state. Not trying to be offensive, I'm just being pragmatic. And also in democratic societies, of which most of the world's countries are democratic, and in democratic societies, you do this thing called having elections. So every 2 to 4 years, you lose 20% of the sitting presidents, and it's new faces that come in. And so it's I won't say it's a waste of time to learn them all, but things rotate so quickly. So having said that, we're going to focus on the most powerful peeps that affect planetary action or cause huge planetary problems, or both, and other leaders that have been around for a long time or will be around for a long time. Hint, hint, because they're probably not in democracies. And we should also know the names of some of the dudes and dudettes who head up the major international organizations. Places like NATO, that's the most powerful military organization on the planet. Probably not a bad idea to know who that person is and what they think about NATO enlargement or about a war with Russia or whatever. So let's pop around the globe and meet some heads of state. And we'll start right here at home. Who is this person? That is U.S. President Barack, now former Barry Obama. Now, am I showing you this person because I think you actually don't know who it is? Hell no! If you don't know who this is, you've been living under a rock for the better part of a decade. I'm starting here at home with a person that's very well identified and familiar to you to put things into perspective for the rest of the peeps that we're going to talk about around the planet. So we'll start with what you know, and then let our knowledge grow through association. Now, let's talk about Barack Obama. Almost. His time is up. Time is fleeting. He's leaving office here in a few more months because, of course, this is a U.S. presidential election year. And who we're putting into office next is going to wildly determine the path that the United States is going to go on for all economic and foreign policy. So this is a big, important year. But back to Barack Obama. He is what we'd call a center-left, just center-left politician. And he's the most popular politician on planet Earth. Whoa, wait a minute now. Hold on, all my conservative friends who are twisting in the wind right now saying, oh, I knew this college professor was super liberal. He loves Barack Obama. No. I said he's the most popular politician on the planet. Am I saying that because he's the best politician? Has achieved the most? Is the bestest, grooviest, coolest? Is the most beloved? I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying he's the most popular politician, because he is the most well-recognized head of state on planet Earth, because everyone else on the planet knows who this person is. The planet. Unless you're totally disconnected from society and you're living out in a rainforest somewhere in a tribe, you know Barack Obama. Maybe even the people in a tribe in the Amazon rainforest know who he is too. He's that popular. Now, why is it he's so popular? Again, because he's good? No. It's because he holds the most powerful position on planet Earth. Position. As the President of the United States of America, he sits in the most powerful position. When he leaves office, he's just another dude living in America. And whoever we elect to move into the White House, they then hold the most powerful position in the world as leader of the world's biggest economy and the world's biggest military. What happens in the United States does affect all of the rest of the planet, and the rest of the planet, BTW, waits with bated breath every U.S. election year, which happens every 4 years, to see who the Americans will put in as their leader, precisely because whoever is leading America will have policies and do things that affect them all over the rest of the planet. And the world, of course, gets immensely frustrated every year when people from the rest of the planet pay more attention to the U.S. election than people in the U.S. pay to their own election. And people all over the planet would probably pay money to vote in the U.S. election, whereas us citizens who can vote, probably only about 50% of us will even bother to go out and vote. I don't know, maybe 60, maybe 65%. Maybe that's good voter turnout, but it flabbergasts the rest of the world that the Americans put in the most powerful single human. And most of us here don't really pay attention or care that much. All right? Just saying. They're all watching because they know their fate, all the rest of the world's fate, is somewhat dependent on who sits in that position. Makes sense? Now, I said he's center-left. Just center-left. Let me go ahead and clarify. Here in the United States, we have two political parties. Yeah, there's some other ones that don't really do that much. Libertarian Party, Green Party, it's probably a Nazi party for all I know. But it's a two-party system. And the two main parties are the Democrats with a capital D and the Republicans with a capital R. The Democrats with a capital D on the world political spectrum, we'd say, are just center-left, while the Republicans with a capital R are just center-right. They are basically right beside each other in the world political spectrum. Meaning, when I say world political spectrum, I'm talking about the great variety of leadership styles and governments and political systems all over planet Earth, and how much power is invested in the government itself versus how much power is delivered to the people. We live in a representative democracy here in the United States, so a representative democracy somewhere near the middle of the political spectrum, in and of itself, could be said as the middle. We're not talking about the far extreme right side of the political spectrum, to be fascism or military dictatorship, maybe even a theocracy, or the extreme left, which would be anarchy or communism. See, what else could we have? More of a multi-party socialist type state. So we're talking the U.S. and representative democracy are somewhere right there in the middle. And even though, especially in an election year, the two political parties in the United States accuse each other of being crazy radicals, the reality is that the Republicans and Democrats are right beside each other politically. They all believe in representative democracy, in rights to the people, in people having a voice in their government, in a government of the people. Neither side would say they don't believe in that, so they're in the center. But again, especially for our foreign friends who happen to be watching this circus of a political election year, the Democrats will say that, Donald Trump and his supporters are right-wing fascist. And the Republicans will say Hillary Clinton's a socialist communist, wants to convert the U.S. to the Russian Soviet Union. You're like, no, 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 no. Those are extremes on the world political stage. Here in the U.S., just center-left for Democrats, just center-right for Republicans. Having said that, let's do a quick analysis, because why not? I'll infuriate some people. I'm not above that. How would we then rank the folks who are going to possibly be the next president of the United States? Well, on the face of it, and you look at their talking points, the policies they're pushing, what they say they want to do with the country, the direction they want to take the country in, you do have to look at Donald Trump and say, well, he is definitely on the right, and he's probably a little further right than most in the Republican Party. Again, I'm not trying to offend anybody. We're just assessing. So the president that Barack Obama took over for was George Bush. George Bush would have been just center-right. I know you might have hated him or you might have loved him, but he's just center-right, just like Barack Obama's just center-left. Donald Trump is definitely further right. No, not extreme, but a little further right on that spectrum than, say, George Bush. He's even a little further right than, say, Ronald Reagan was. And the reason I would say something like that is because of his policies of wanting to build a wall, wanting to close off immigration, wanting to conserve, rally the United States, make it more of an island. He's against kind of freer trade and globalization. Those are all kind of hallmarks, and he's more socially conservative. Those are all kind of the hallmarks of leaning more towards the right. Let's go to the other side then. Hillary Clinton, where do we put her on this scale? Believe it or not, and this is going to surprise people, maybe offend, but if you look at the way she operates and what she stands for and her political connectedness, she's actually in the center. She's not even as far left as Barack Obama. So we would definitely say as a Democrat that Hillary Clinton's kind of center-left. But she's kind of really pro-business, pro-status quo, pro kind of, yeah, this is the way it works and we're not changing anything. But the Clintons have had really a lot of corporate support. And so that's actually more of a hallmark of the right side of the political spectrum. So it's a little confusing when it comes to her, as I'd say, yeah, she's definitely not as left as Barack Obama. Again, in a political climate, in an election year, the right wants to paint her as some bizarre lefty. But honestly, that's where you'd put Bernie Sanders. Not a bizarre lefty, but Bernie Sanders was campaigning for more social reform and redistribution of wealth. He was further left than Barack Obama. But Hillary, she's a little further right. Does that make sense? Again, feel free to dispute that and call me names or hit me up in comments. That's cool. I'm just trying to understand and help you understand the spectrum of what's going on. And now for the Titanic 2017 update. The biggest update on planet Earth, quite frankly, in the last year. And that is we got to put our new boy, Donnie T, into the political spectrum of the United States and of the world. Donald J. Trump is now the president of the United States, and a more stark difference could not be made between the old leader that just left and this new leader who just came in terms of poise, personality, and policies. Huge Titanic shift. Now, I honestly do not care at all about the poise and personality part. We'll let the frenzied media update you on the second-to-second happenings of Donald J. Trump's life. But I do want you to consider the radical shift in policy that's now taking place in the U.S. and the world because of the election of this single person into this single, very important high office.
It's such a major big deal that I actually refer to it as the Trump bump, a planetary speed bump on the superhighway of where the world was heading for most of the last 70 plus years in terms of policy and international cooperation and lots of other things. The speed bump may not derail everything, but it's certainly putting the U.S. and the world on a slightly different path than it was on. That's why I call it the speed bump, the Trump bump. Now, this is a leader and an administration a bit further to the political right than the average conservative Republican in the United States. They're not far right, but they're further right than the Republican Party on average. How so? Well, in the sense that this group that's currently in power in the United States seems much more anti-immigration, much more anti-global economy, anti-trade bloc. These are all hallmarks of the Republican Party. They're anti-United Nations a bit more than the average Republican, perhaps even anti-NATO. That's brand new. I mean, the NATO's a military organization the U.S. created with all of its allies, and this administration's kind of pulling back from them a little bit. This administration seems to even question America's role as a world leader in many respects and wants to focus more on America for America's sake. They question America's status quo situation with its allies and even with its enemies, particularly the U.S.'s relationship with Russia. The Trump administration has worked hard at trying to warm up ties. So these are very different paths that the United States has not been on in the past. This administration also seems much more hawkish in terms of willing or even wanting to project American power via the use of military force, something they have not done yet, but it's very possible they're going to. So you put all of these global themes together. I'm not talking about domestic policy at all. Put all these global themes together with all the domestic mess that I won't mention because you get it oversaturated with it on a daily basis. And you have a very different type of U.S. president that many pundits and analysts and political scientists would describe as populist. From the people. They are not from the status quo. They're the anti-status quo. They're the anti-establishment. It's what populist kind of means. So this populist president and this populist administration is one that kind of seeks to actively diss the current structure of the political parties in the United States, but also is kind of dissing the standard operating procedure of planet Earth that I've been referring to. They're definitely attempting to put the United States on a different path than it's been on, one that leads into uncharted waters that none of us can quite predict yet. There's going to be heavy seas ahead. It certainly won't be smooth sailing no matter what happens. So we'll continue to follow how the United States policy and world policy unfolds under this new Trump administration. Okay, now we got the spectrum in the United States of what's happening. Let's get the hell out of the United States and look at the rest of the world. Let's move outward. And speaking of embarrassing, as in this current U.S. election cycle that's a circus, that's embarrassing enough. Here's something even more embarrassing. How many people in America even know the presidents and prime ministers, the people in charge of the countries just north and south of them? How many people know who's in charge of the U.S.'s neighbors and biggest trading partners and allies? I bet $1 million that 99.5% of Americans could not tell you who's in charge of Canada nor Mexico. So we have to remedy that, and you are certainly going to remedy it because I'm going to remedy it for you right now. Let's head to the great white Arctic north to not Alaska, but Canada. And it's not all Arctic. I like to make fun of our chilly maple syrup sipping friends up north. But the new Canadian kid on the block to know is Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada. Prime Minister. We'll come back to that later. And Justin Trudeau took over in late 2015, so really hasn't even been in office a year. He took over from conservative Stephen Harper. Justin Trudeau is the second youngest Canadian Prime Minister ever, the first from Generation X, whatever that means. And he is also the eldest son of a former Prime Minister. That guy's name was Pierre Trudeau. He's the first child of a previous Canadian Prime Minister to hold the post again. And he is a
darn handsome man to boot, right? Now, you don't really need to know that he's pretty. Although I would liken him and his political legacy to JFK for you political insiders. What do I mean by that? Young, vibrant liberal on the left, comes from a political family. There's a lot of similarities, a JFK of the North, if you like. But he is a prime minister, and I'll come back to this when we talk about the United Kingdom and the prime ministers in Europe. But I do want you to know this for now. Justin Trudeau is the only prime minister in the Americas. Yeah, like in our whole hemisphere, we're mostly almost all democracies, but the leaders of almost all countries in the Americas are presidents, not prime ministers. Again, we'll come back to this. This is not just a change in leadership that happened less than a year ago in terms of a new person in charge, but it's a new political party that took over. Not a new political party, but a different political party. So it's like saying, oh, the Democrats held the presidency and then the Republicans took over. So it's been a big change up north, and that is that he is the leader of the Liberal Party. Justin Trudeau is the leader of the Liberal Party. I wonder what his political affiliation is. Where could we put him on the spectrum? If you said just center-left, that's pretty good. And I would say he's even a little further left than Barack Obama. He's closer left to Bernie Sanders than he is even Barack Obama. So liberal left up in Canada. They took over in October 2015. He was sworn in November 2015. The Liberals won 184 seats out of 338. With 40% of the parliament, which gives them a majority government. Again, I'll talk about all this more when we get to the United Kingdom. So, Liberal Party taking over from a Conservative Party, which held a sway over the country for about a decade, I think. And this means it's been a big change in government focus. And that's why it's important to know the people. Because a Conservative versus a Liberal is going to affect policy and the direction of their country in radically different ways. Again, as we're going to see, depending on who wins the U.S. election. So in Canada, the previous Prime Minister Stephen Harper was staunch conservative, socially conservative, pro-business, pro-pipeline, if you know that stuff, pro-coal extraction and oil extraction, kind of not so interested in the environment. Actually, Canada was one of the countries that drug its feet, signing any sort of global climate change treaty to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was one of the holdouts under Harper, and now you have a Liberal guy in charge. He's like, oh, no, we'll sign that. In fact, he's like pro-legalizing marijuana. This is Justin Trudeau. Wants to pull back from Canadian involvement fighting ISIS, wants to bring in more refugees into Canada, is pro-women's rights. I mean, you start going down the litany of liberal values, and he's got it all, and he's quite open about it. So I just mentioned you've got this JFK of the North, Justin Trudeau, moving Canada from conservative leadership to liberal leadership. And he's a younger liberal left, handsome man who replaced an older conservative guy. Let's now go south of the border, because the same exact thing recently happened down there. It's kind of crazy. The president of Mexico is one Enrique Peña. I love saying Peña. Enrique Peña took over in 2013 from a Felipe Calderon. You don't have to know Felipe, but Felipe was very much like Stephen Harper, conservative, socially conservative. He was a law and order guy. He wanted to make the military stronger, the police stronger. He started a war on drugs against the cartels, which has made Mexico into kind of a war zone bloodbath for the 10 years he was in charge. And then you have a new guy come in, and Enrique Peña, again, a handsome figure, no doubt, from a political legacy line, from a connected family. I think he was governor of Mexico City or something. Young, good-looking, on the liberal left, center-left spectrum. He changed the direction of the country considerably. He wanted to soften his stance on the war on drugs and the war on the cartels. He wanted to rejuvenate Mexican economy, and there were actually really high hopes for big change when Peña came into office in 2013. But despite efforts to jumpstart the economy, including reforms to telecommunications and the oil industry, trying to liberalize it to make it more competitive, frustration has just been growing. He's found himself kind of unable to improve the economy, to combat the drug-related crime, which even though he softened his stance, has not abated at all. And even corruption seems to be on the rise in Mexico. So Justin Trudeau up north, wildly popular. He was just on the cover of a comic book, for Pete's sake. Still beloved. High public ratings. Down south, President Pena is suffering from historically low popularity ratings, somewhere on the order of 20 to 25% approval rating. That's super low. And he's had a series of corruption scandals and perhaps a revelation that he may have even plagiarized part of his thesis he wrote for his law degree. Oh my God. And most of you probably never even heard of this guy, except maybe just last week when he met with Donald Trump, which actually made him more unpopular. Now, again, I'm not making fun of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is a guy campaigning on all the Mexicans are bad. We're going to build a big wall to keep them out and make them pay for it. It's been part of his campaign speeches. And the Mexican president had him down for coffee, I guess, and didn't really challenge Trump on any of these hot topics, and largely came off looking like a dolt and embarrassing the Mexican nation. So he just got more unpopular if it was possible. Now, having said that, two different politicians on either side of the United States. I've given you just a little bit of background about them. Oh, and he's liberal left, so look at it now. We have in Canada, United States, and in Mexico, you have center-left presidents and prime ministers in charge. So the whole North American continent is a sweep to the left. That might change soon, but right now. Why should we know these guys? Well, first off, it's just an intelligent thing to do. You don't want to be one of those people that doesn't know nothing. More important than that, let's pretend like you don't care what other people think of you. You don't want to look intelligent. That's fine. I think you should know the leaders of the two states that are well-established democracies, like the United States. 3 well-established democracies, 3 good neighbors. Both of these countries are huge U.S. allies. Huge U.S. allies. Both countries are huge military allies. Now, you don't often hear about the Mexican military helping out or doing anything with the United States, say in Iraq or anything, because they don't. But don't underestimate the Mexican military either. They are a significant military power, fighting the drug cartels. They just don't do the international stuff of the United States, but they would if they were called upon. Canada, for its part, and I could be wrong, somebody fact check me, but I believe the Canadian military has fought side by side with American soldiers in every war in the last 100 years. I think the Canadians have been helping out the United States pretty much in every battle since the War of 1812. And for those of you who don't know why I'm laughing, go look up who fought in the War of 1812. So huge allies, huge military allies. More important than that, huge trade partners of the United States. I don't even know which one's number 1 and 2, but Canada and Mexico are the U.S.'s biggest trading partners. Most of the stuff you buy or sell out of this country, they're coming into this country, is from Mexico and the and Canada. Huge amounts of money and services and cash and financial stuff goes back and forth between and over these borders every day. It's one of the reasons why this is one of the richest areas of planet Earth. So why is it it's such an issue that now we might have to build walls and stuff? Well, again, I'm ready to offend you. The whole immigration issue is wildly inflated in its importance here in the United States, probably mostly because of the election cycle. But it has been nothing but a net gain, economically and otherwise, to the United States and Canada and Mexico to have a big free trade area. It's called NAFTA, by the way, that allows for this interaction economically. It's no mistake that all 3 of these economies have grown solidly for the last 20 years. Increased trade, increased interaction. Immigration is now an issue for whatever reasons, whatever value you put on it, but it has been part of the success story of all 3 of these states. We'll see where it goes in the future. That may change because of this election cycle. And change it has. To continue on this Trump bump phenomena, of which I updated you to earlier, Trump really hates the NAFTA, aims to halt immigration virtually of all kinds, and in further proof of the power of an individual to shape national and world policy, just since taking office not even a year ago, the Trump administration has done a variety of things which have set the United States on a different course. Things like dropping out of the International Paris Climate Accords. One person just said, nope, we're not doing that anymore. Gotten rid of the TPP, a Pacific trade bloc that was forming up for the last decade.
wants to make a tremendous dent in NAFTA, a 20 or 30-year-old trade bloc within North America. Just announced the demise of DACA, D-A-C-A. I'll let you go look that up on your own. Wants to have travel bans on multiple Muslim countries. Wants to build a giant wall around the United States to shield it from all the ne'er-do-wells of planet Earth, particularly those damn Canadians. Oh, wait, and actually they're just targeting Mexico for now. But yeah, we'll get to the Canadians later. So perhaps more of this is on the way, since this is really just the kind of beginning course of 4 years of this administration. They're definitely moving towards a more closed society in all senses of that idea or philosophy. One that does not embrace globalism so openly, does not embrace the global economy, and perhaps does not even embrace global institutions that have been the bedrock of the modern international cooperation and commerce system that's been in place since World War II. That's a major shift. And that is the Trump bump of which I speak. Again, for all the super fans of the Trump administration out there, please do not take this personally. I'm not passing judgment on whether this is good or bad. That is entirely up to you. Again, I just want you to be thinking about the different path that the U.S. is on and how it's going to and is already impacting world events. But let's head further south. Talk about that southern border. And by the way, one last thing I'll say about the borders between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico. They're largely unguarded and unenforced and don't even have a fence on them. That's something that may surprise a lot of people. Folks, I guess, who want to build a big wall know this. But yeah, there are some walled areas of the U.S.-Mexican border, but there are hundreds of miles that are desert that ain't guarded at all. Hell, go up to Canada, there's like thousands of miles that are unguarded. And that's actually for a good reason. And it's because we're all friends. Not many places on planet Earth don't have to defend their borders all the time. Most places you go, you're at war with the state next door to you, or they're going to try to pinch some of your land. So you have fences and border guards and patrols and all this. You don't have that in North America. You don't have that between any of these countries. Except now, maybe a huge wall is going to get built. Again, looking historically, it's a net gain, not a net loss, but politically, we'll see where the football takes us. Now, let's head even further south in the U.S.-Mexican border. Let's get down to the rest of Latin America, and let's go even further left on our political spectrum, economically and politically, as it is a major theme of all of Latin America. I just told you that all of the North American states are center-left, but we can go further left than just center-left when we start heading south of the border. Now, going to the left side of the political spectrum has been a theme of Latin America for decades. Well, why would that be? Well, in Latin America, perhaps more so than any other region on planet Earth, perhaps, you have really great wealth disparity. This is a term you probably know already, but wealth disparity is when you have a few people that own almost everything and a whole bunch of people that own virtually nothing. There's a great gap between rich and poor. Huge gap. That's the wealth disparity. In rich countries, that gap is smaller. In the United States, the gap is smaller. In Scandinavian countries, it's super small. Everybody has kind of an equal share in the wealth. Yes, there's some richer people, and yeah, there's some poorer people, but in the richer states, that gap is pretty small. In other places, that gap is super huge. And Latin America has historically and currently been in that category of, wow, there's like 5% of the population of this country in Latin America that owns 90% of the wealth, and the other 95% don't got squat. Why would I be talking about wealth disparity when I thought we were going to talk about political leaders and why Latin America leans towards the left? Well, here's the deal in democracies. Who gets to elect leaders? Who gets to elect leaders? The majority elects leaders in a democracy, and if the majority of your great wealth disparity state is poor, who are they going to vote for? They're going to vote for pro-business conservative folks, or they're going to vote for liberal left economic policy folks who say, hey, we should redistribute some of the wealth to decrease wealth disparity. There you go, you got it. Boom, the light bulb just went on. In a lot of Latin American countries, the move towards the left has been fueled by the masses, which say, yes, we have nothing to lose, so of course we're willing to change political and maybe even economic systems. We're willing to experiment with more socialist economic policy because that promises to redistribute some of the wealth to us, and we got no wealth, so let's redistribute it. Now, of course, there's many ways you can redistribute wealth. You can raise taxes on, say, rich people, or raise taxes on corporation and use that money to give away benefits like free health care or better education or roads, right? Or welfare or food stamps. Or, in the case of many Latin American countries, you can nationalize some businesses. That is, physically take over the oil business or the cement business or the steel business. Physically, the government takes it and says, okay, well, it's still going to be operating as a business, but all the profits go to us, the state, and then we'll give out welfare and food stamps and build roads and schools. Got it? So this has been the trend in Latin America because of great wealth disparity, because most of them are democracies, actually almost all. The only kind of non-democracy in the Americas is Cuba. So all the other places are like, yes, we're going to experiment with more left-leaning economic/political spectrum type of systems. Now, how far they're willing to go to the left to experiment with this stuff differentiates a lot of the states of Latin America. I'm not painting a single brushstroke across all Latin America and saying, oh, they're all extreme leftists. No. We got to put people on the scale, which we're doing all the time here. Put it on the spectrum and see what's what. You'll see that there are some places that are actually pretty darn far left on this spectrum, and others that are just center left, like the United States and Canada and maybe even Mexico, okay? We'll start at the start to the extreme left, and that is you do have this holdout I've referred to called Cuba. And you have these two guys, and you know these guys are Fidel and Raul Castro, the Castro brothers, who have pretty much, with an iron fist or otherwise, controlled the state of Cuba since the 1959 Cuban Revolution. And it was a Cuban/communist revolution. I ain't labeling it, it's just what it is. They had it in mind to alleviate wealth disparity in one fell swoop by throwing out the old rightist regime, which is pretty much a military dictatorship, and then converting the whole island into a communist utopia where there's no private property. The state owns everything, the state redistributes everything, and everybody's happy and whatever. Well, that's kind of failed. We all kind of see that now. And just a heads up alert, here in 2016, I won't say the Cuban communist experiment is collapsing, but it's morphing rapidly to not be communist. Meaning that U.S. President Barack Obama has actually been warming ties with Raul Castro, who's now in charge of the country. Fidel was in charge of the country for a very long time, but he's like 1 million years old, and Raul's like 5 years younger than 1 million, so Raul's now in charge. And there has been significant warming between the states as of late, like literally just in the last year, where Barack Obama is going to reestablish relations with Cuba. We now have a diplomacy reestablished, so we have embassies that are reopening, and it's been closed since there's been an American full embargo against Cuba for decades and decades and decades. So sorry to espouse on the Castro brothers just a second more, but things are changing rapidly, and it's going to be hard to call Cuba even a experimental communist state here very soon because they're opening the doors quickly, and it's when the doors get thrown open here soon, it's going to be a rapid transition to something else. Now, I ain't going to say it's going to be a capitalist democracy wonderland, but it's going to change to something else. But for now, we'll put them on the far extreme left because they're still pretending to be full-on communists, both politically and economically, okay? Let's just go just a slight shade right of them, though. And that will take us to Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is actually, honestly, more important to understanding Latin America today than even Cuba is. Cuba's kind of been floating out there in the Caribbean doing its thing since 1959. And you did have the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost brought the world to nuclear war. But they haven't really affected much since then. Venezuela has actually affected a lot of things going on in Latin America and will help you understand the region a bit more and how it's changing right this second. And that is that there's a guy in charge of Venezuela right now. His name is Nicolas Maduro. He's probably going to be thrown from office soon himself. He's not even the one I'm that concerned with. There was a guy. There once was a man from Venezuela. Someone fill in the rhyme for that. But there once was a man who led Venezuela. His name is Hugo Chavez. And Hugo Chavez was actually a really important guy to know because he did push Venezuela to the left side of the political spectrum, pretty far left. And is experimenting with socialism in a very big way. In fact, I ain't going to call him a socialist. He called himself a socialist. Said he was part of a social revolution in Venezuela to redistribute wealth and redistribute political power in the state and change it using the government as a tool to redistribute, okay? And his influence can't be underestimated in terms of affecting other Latin American countries to also move perhaps to the left, or at least experiment with more leftist-style economic policy and political policy, okay? Now, Hugo Chavez was a political firebrand that did all this stuff and affected a lot of things, but Hugo Chavez is also really dead right now. He actually died in 2013 while he was in office. And that's why maybe I shouldn't get you to learn a dead guy, but I'm going to get you to learn this dead guy because he was kind of a big deal. In summary, why was he a big deal? Well, again, he was a firebrand. That's a fiery speaker. Could get people fired up. Self-proclaimed leader of a left-leaning socialist revolution. It was actually called the Bolivarian Revolution, and he wanted to export this Bolivarian revolution to all Latin America, not just within Venezuela. Now, for those of you who don't know who Bolivar is, of course you don't. His name was Simon Bolivar, and he was actually one of the revolutionaries that helped a lot of Latin American states gain their independence back in the early 1800s. He's like the George Washington of South America. And he, when he was fighting for independence from Spain and Portugal, really espoused ideas of there should be economic equality along with political equality and us running our own affairs. So slightly different than the American Revolution. So that's why Hugo Chavez picked up this Bolivarian theme, called it a Bolivarian Revolution. We're going to change the whole system economically and politically. And he did a lot. He was in power from about 2002 until he died in office in 2013. He was beloved by the poor masses of Venezuela, back to wealth disparity, who all voted for him regularly. He was voted into office multiple times by wide margins. He didn't cheat to get in. But he was hated by the U.S., and he hated the U.S. right back. And why would that be? Well, in his bid for socialist revolution, he decided to nationalize a lot of industries in Venezuela. That is, take over the oil industry, take over the cement industry, take over the iron ore industry. Physically, the government takes it over and runs it. Now, so what? That's their country. What does the U.S. care about that? Well, except that a lot of the oil companies that they took over were U.S. companies like Exxon and Chevron. So the U.S. doesn't like when other countries takes over U.S. corporations' stuff. So this started a long-standing battle of, oh, the U.S. hates this guy because he's socialist/communist. Commie. And for his part, Hugo Chavez regularly called the United States, the kind of devil of the North, an imperialist pig who had the U.S. Uncle Sam's boot was on the throat of all Latin American countries. So, it was a hate-hate relationship in a really big way for a decade. As a firebrand, really good speaker with a message, he really only got away with this because Venezuela does produce a ton of oil. They have one of the biggest oil reserves on planet Earth. And that gave him the power, because he had so much money coming in from the oil, to pay for social programs and welfare and all this other stuff. And he could actually give away oil. He gave oil away to his leftist friends in Cuba and his leftist friends in Bolivia. And therefore, he had a much bigger voice than one should assume the president of Venezuela should have. It's not that big of a country, not that powerful of a country. But Hugo Chavez is one of those leaders that made his voice way bigger outside of his country and his region, and affected other Latin American countries to also say, hey, I think I might do that too. Hey, we should do that. They're doing okay in Venezuela. They're decreasing wealth disparity. Yeah, we'll get to that in a different podcast. But he did die in office in March 2013. His replacement in Venezuela, I do want you to know, is Nicolas Maduro. Nicolas Maduro, really, the bar was set way too high for Nicolas Maduro. I think he used to be a bus driver before he became president, and I'm not making fun of bus drivers. He may lead Venezuela, but he can't possibly fill the shoes of his predecessor, again, who was this world figure. And thus, we're not likely to hear much more about the Bolivarian Revolution, and not at least right this second, not from Venezuela. Because Maduro will be lucky to even hold his own country together, which he's barely been able to do since 2013, much less be charismatic enough to keep the socialist flame lit across Latin America. He's just not that much of a firebrand. Oh, pun intended. Lit it, right? Flame lit, firebrand.
And on top of that, Venezuela is currently kind of collapsing. The socialist experiment there has gotten pummeled since Maduro took office, kind of because the price of oil has gone way down. Probably also because the policies simply have not been implemented well. Corruption is endemic. Crime is endemic in Venezuela. Venezuela, I would say, is a very divided society that is very close, like this, close to full-on civil war. And Nicolas Maduro will oversee that. Right now, in September 2016, as I make this podcast, there is a referendum being passed around by the population. They're trying to get enough signatures to call for his removal from office or to have a vote to remove him from office. And the likely response is he'll send the military out to crush it if it gets too rowdy. So it's just a mess in Venezuela.
And right I was about that military move by Maduro last year. Here's a brief 27 update to clue you in to the utter chaos and disaster that has continued to befall Venezuela. In a outright power grab, Maduro has used the military to squash all dissent, or at least try. There have been dozens of people killed, thousands injured. There have been pretty much daily protests for the entire year of 2017. And all of this has culminated in a constitutional change that was forced through by the Maduro administration that gives Maduro pretty much all power to dissolve the National Assembly. That would be like the president just getting rid of Congress because they feel like it, which Maduro has now done, and given Maduro control over the judiciary. And so when you have one single person that's in charge of all three branches of government, it ain't really a democracy anymore. That's right. Venezuela is now fully a dictatorship / military dictatorship. Let's call it just a dictatorship. This is a move that is reviled not just by the United States and other peace and democracy-loving countries, but even more so by Venezuela's Latin American neighbors, which are none too happy about this move away from democracy, which almost all of South America and most of Latin America enjoys and supports democracy, into this kind of demagoguery, dictatorship, military dictatorship that Maduro has spun his country into. But let's move away from Venezuela and perhaps a little further to the right on this political spectrum we're talking about. And again, when I say political spectrum, and sometimes I say political economic, it's hard to tease these things out when places like Venezuela really kind of put the two together. Cuba does too. It's a political economic system they're trying to pull off. Either way, they're on the left side of the spectrum in both camps, okay? And pretty far left. But there are other just center-left leaders, or slightly left leaders in Latin America, some of which have been influenced by Chavez's decade in power in the Bolivarian Revolution. And I'll go next door to Bolivia. Now, Bolivia is not a big regional power player either, but its leader is interesting, and his name is Evo Morales, President Evo Morales of Bolivia. He's interesting because he is the first indigenous president of Bolivia. That is native, not native born, but like Native American Indian type of thing. Call it, there's many names for indigenous here in the Americas, but he's the first indigenous leader of Bolivia. He may be the first indigenous leader in Latin America. I'm not going to swear to that, but it's kind of a big deal because indigenous folks actually are still fighting for basic rights in many places, and they're usually part of the most impoverished components of society across Latin America. So the mere fact that he's indigenous is important, but he is just slightly right of, say, a Chavez or Nicolas Maduro in terms of political / socialist thought. He followed the Chavez lead. In fact, I would call the Castros, Chavez, and Morales, I often called the three amigos. They all worked together. They all had a vision of a more leftist, utopian society. Again, not really fully communist, but certainly using the government to redistribute wealth much more openly and including nationalizing industries. So Morales has done a lot of that, and he's still in power in Bolivia. And I've not told you anything about U.S.-Bolivian relationships, but given what you just learned in the last 5 minutes, what do you think the relationship between the United States and Bolivia is? Take a wild stab. Yeah, you probably got it right. The U.S. probably don't like Evo Morales much either. He was best friends with Hugo Chavez, who the U.S. spent a decade hating. So, see, that's why it's important to kind of know people. You kind of get the sense of, okay, without even knowing, I know the relationships going on between the U.S. and Bolivia because of the peoples in charge of these countries. Now, we can go a little closer to the center.
political center and go down to Chile. And one of my favorite world leaders is in charge of Chile. Her name is Michelle Bachelet. Michelle Bachelet, I would say just slightly left of center left, okay? So a little further left than you'd say Barack Obama. Maybe about as left as a Bernie Sanders. See how I do this? I try to make relations in your brain for stuff. And President Michelle Bachelet oversaw a really good period for Chile in her first term. She's actually in her second term, but Chile has one of these clauses that you can't serve your terms consecutively. So she did her first stint as president. It's either 4 or 6 years. I can't remember. Mexico, it's 6. I think it's just 4 for Chile. She did her first 4 years as president a while back, but then she had to take a break because it's in their constitution. But she was so popular, as soon as she became available again, they voted her back in for her second term. So she, in Chile, following on the same theme, would be on the center-left side of the spectrum, fighting for decreasing wealth disparity. And there's actually a big social movement and student movement in Chile to have free or greatly reduced education, even up to the college university level. There's a lot of political activity in Chile. That's an interesting nation. And Chile's doing quite well, by the way, too. Their #1 trading partner is the United States. Food for thought. They're got a decent middle class, a decent level of technology and development, and I'd call them a fully developed country here in another 10 years, given the way they're going. So think about Chile and a female leader, Michelle Bachelet, so popular, elected in twice. And now we'll get even closer to the center, but now we come to a caveat it's kind of a sad caveat. And that is that we can't talk about Latin America without talking about the big boy, the beast, down south, and that would be Brazil, the bombshell. Brazil is the biggest economy of Latin America, the biggest population in Latin America, the biggest state by size in Latin America. Brazil is a regional power player, increasingly fighting for a top slot as a world power player. And the leader of said awesome potential world power player Brazil was one Dilma Rousseff. And she was just center-left, Maybe a little further left than that, but not much. Well, a little further left than Barack Obama, but not much. So what I want you to understand is that there is a movement toward the left, has been a movement towards the left across Latin America because of wealth disparity, because the masses don't have as much, and so they vote in politicians that will level the playing field, so to speak. And that is certainly true in Brazil, a place that has had massive wealth disparity. And there's still millions and tens of millions of people below the poverty line. So not surprising, they have been left-leaning for a while, for a decade and a half strong, I think now. But I just said that Dilma Rousseff, Brazil's first woman president, was Brazil's first woman president. What happened? It's the reason I'm redoing this video right now in September 2016. She just got impeached. I don't like to work. And so now I have to redo this video because the Brazilian population hated her so much, she got thrown out of office, physically impeached out of office. Man, what's up with that? Well, I'm going to do a whole podcast. There is an existing podcast on why Brazil just impeached their leader, so you can go watch that for all the details. But for the timeline, Wednesday, August 31st, 2016, Dilma Rousseff was officially impeached by the Brazilian Senate and thrown from office. Why? On charges of, let's see if I can remember, manipulating the federal budget in an effort to conceal the nation's mounting economic problems, of which they have many. What? Brazil, the place that just had the Olympics and the World Cup, and yeah, and it's growing, and it's a top 10 world economy? Yep. Brazil has seen hard times in the last few years, and the rage of the general population vented itself against Dilma Rousseff and her government. And there's tons of corruption in it too, and it's kind of a mess. However, I do want you to know that she didn't get thrown out for embezzling or on criminal charges. It really was almost a technicality, bureaucratic charge. But it shows the level of angst and the divisiveness of the Brazilian society as well, because things aren't going well there either. And of course, they're still dealing with great wealth disparity. However, the person that's now in charge, and this may not last, is one President Michael Temer. So now we need to know President of Brazil, Michael Temer. I don't even know nothing about him. He's like 75 years old. He was the vice president. He's of a political party himself that's just slightly to the right of Dilma Rousseff's party. So it is kind of important to know him, not because of the man. He probably won't last in office. I'll tell you that why in a sec.
But it's more important to understand that he actually, in being in office, is now pushing Brazil even closer to the center. So again, there's this great spectrum of leftist liberal policies across Latin America. You can't put them all in one category. Some are just center left, and now Brazil's almost in the center, all the way to far, far left in Cuba. Now, why would I say that, yeah, I'm going to make you learn this guy for now, but you probably don't know him for long, is because he himself is under multiple investigations for massive corruption. Massive corruption, bribery, any bad thing that a politician can do, him and a whole bunch of other political leaders in Brazil are being investigated for right now. He's supposed to be in office until the end of the term that Dilma got elected for, and that's till 2018, but it is questionable he's going to last either. He may end up getting impeached or thrown in jail. So it's just a mess down in Brazil, but learn this for now. His political party moving Brazil even closer to the center, and that seems to be a theme now that I'm going to bring up for the first time ever, that it looks like Latin America may be pulling back from a lot of its leftist, more liberal political / economic experimentation. Left-leaning has definitely been the theme across all Latin America in the modern age for the last 20 to 30 years. Now you know why. But things are not forever, and change is eternal. And so it does look like there have been some moves in some places to give the other team a try, to move back towards the conservative side of the political spectrum. And I'll just point out a few places. I think Panama has had a conservative guy in charge for a while. I believe he's still in office. Several other states, both in Central America and South America, have conservative leaders. I think Paraguay just voted in a conservative guy. The ones I want you to know are Colombia. Colombia is kind of an important country. They are kind of good friends with the United States, especially after we helped them fight a drug war back in the 80s. But the president of Colombia is one Juan Manuel Santos, and he's been in office. I think he's in his second term. He took over from and he's set to right, conservative, and he took over from a guy, former President Uribe, who was even more conservative than him. So again, there is some variation in this leftist theme across Latin America, and Colombia has been in the conservative column for a couple decades. And it looks like that shows no signs of abating. On top of that, I've left out one of the other major important power players down in Latin America, and that is Argentina. And Argentina, for a decade or two, was also in the left-leaning category. In fact, the folks in charge of that, it was a husband-wife team called the Kirchners. I don't expect you to know that for now, but if you're interested, go look up the Kirchners. And it was the husband who was president for a couple terms, and then the wife became president for a couple terms, Cristina Kirchner. And they were also avowedly kind of on the Hugo Chavez side of things, more leftist economic policy. But Argentina has just been a disaster. And no, I'm not making fun of the Kirchners specifically, and I'm not anti-leftist or anti-liberal. But Argentina is a country that actually should be super rich, and it has just been floundering. And it just floundered under the Kirchners' rule. It had highlights, but overall, it's just been going down, and for no good reason. So, in December 2015, the people of Argentina, it's not a coup, not anything bad, they had a presidential vote, and they voted the left out. And so now you have President Mauricio Macri, who is just center-right, in charge of Argentina. Again, is he super important to know personally? Not so much. I want you to kind of know the bigger theme that, there does seem to be some wariness now of continuing down a left path, and some societies are starting in Latin America to pull back to the right. It's early in this. It's still mostly leftist governments. I didn't even mention a few of my other favorites, like Rafael Correa, president of Ecuador. He's super leftist too. And there's others, but these are the big players I want you to know, and it's still mostly in kind of a left-leaning side of the political spectrum camp, most of Latin America. And if you go look at all the Americas, the whole theme is like, oh wow, from Canada to U.S. to Mexico to Brazil to Chile, it's mostly center-left to further left political systems. But that might be changing. It might be changing. It might be moving towards the right, towards the conservative side of the spectrum in Latin America, and it definitely is over in Europe. Ah! That brings us to a break point. Enough of the Chavez chums and the leaning to the left Latinos. Let's head across the Atlantic to Eurasia and find out about the peeps running that place.